So, I know a lot of us game developers are socially awkward, and we prefer to sit behind a computer screen all day instead of meeting real people. I know I would. But live events are a fantastic way to market your game and get some exposure. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use events to meet the right people, get market feedback, and get your game some exposure. Real quick before we start, I want to note that there are two primary types of events. First, you've got the local meetups and game dev groups, and second, you have the conferences, conventions, and trade shows. For this video, we're going to focus exclusively on those, because while local meetups are great places to make new friends, they don't expose you to the public at large or move the needle when it comes to marketing. So let's get started. First things first, let's talk about event etiquette. So I'm going to assume that you have a booth or a spot at an event, as most of the etiquette, if you don't, is simple social skills like shaking hands or eye contact. But assuming you have a booth, you want to be outside of it, or in it if it's an open floor plan. And you want to engage people that walk by. Don't be scared of talking to people, they're there for games, and you have one. Don't be intrusive and obnoxious, just be polite and make eye contact, then engage and ask them if they want to try your game. When they start to play, give them any basic info they need, like story up until that point or controls, and don't hover over them. Do not jump in and try and explain where they should go or where they should jump in the game. You should watch them and learn from what they do, not from what they say. Also pay attention to how people react to your marketing materials, what they think the game is, what they think it's about, etc. There are two primary reasons you're going to be at an event in the first place. The first is actual feedback on your game and how it's received in the public, and that's a big one. Secondly, you're going to be there for the exposure. You want people to see your game and you want people to know that a launch is coming up. Most of the time, even if you're near launch of your game, you're there for both reasons. You never want to ignore feedback just because you're almost about to launch. The feedback on how eye-catching your game is on the floor is just as important as the game itself. If people aren't interested in even playing the game from the get-go, that should tell you something. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your game is bad, it just means that your presentation could be off, or the way that you explain the game isn't very compelling. You can also take this opportunity to practice different elevator pitches. If you have a few sentences on what your game is, you can try a few of them and see which ones work best and compel the player to actually play your game the most. So number two, let's talk about the things you'll need for an event. The absolute essentials here are your game, a way to play your game, and some kind of signage with your game art or tagline. I also recommend that you get something to pass out like custom pens, flash drives, business cards, stuff with your name on it. People love free stuff. And lastly, you want to take email addresses so that you can market to them later, but a simple iPad with an email account will do the trick. If the venue doesn't have free Wi-Fi, something as simple as a clipboard will work great. If people are interested in your game, you want to capture their info so you can follow up with them later. They may be hyped and ready to buy at this moment, but trust me, they're going to forget about you before the end of the day. You want to make sure that you email them and remind them to buy when you actually launch. And don't feel sleazy about doing this. People are going to be on the list voluntarily. If they don't want to get reminded, they don't sign up. So number three, which events should you actually attend? So this one has a general answer. You want to attend the ones that either interest you or will have your target market present there. My personal favorites are PAX and Indicate. If you're planning on selling your game, I wouldn't recommend something like GDC, that's more for networking. But I've included a huge list in the description below that has a bunch of organized events by location and date. Pick the ones that match you and your game. So number four, what can you expect to actually pay for something like this? Well, your costs for the event vary depending on which one you go to, but it's not too bad. Something like PAX, for example, costs about $1,250 for a 10x10 booth, but it also varies by which PAX you go to. Also keep in mind that your marketing materials, your handouts are going to cost you money, and your transportation and accommodation are going to be expensive, but we're going to talk about ways how you can reduce those costs as well. If you're really looking to trim down costs, as most indies are, I would highly recommend that you check out Indie Mega Booth. The idea is simple. They buy a mega booth and they split it up with other developers into really small show areas. It's cool because most indies don't need 10x10, they need something like 2x2, and that's what Mega Booth does really well. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out. Also don't forget that if you know other people that want to showcase their game, you can split the cost of the booth with them. There will likely be plenty of space for both of you. So number five, let's talk about transportation to the event. So getting to and from the event is always pretty simple, but if you've never done an event before, it can be scary. Most of the time, indies drive to the event, so they have their car and they have a way to transport their stuff. If you don't drive there, you can use Uber or Lyft for a quick ride from where you're staying to the event. It's almost always cheaper than taxi rides. When I had a lot of equipment, I called one of the bigger Uber cars and they were super cool about letting us load stuff up. But I would check with them first before you do that. And it's almost always better if you're going with friends or you know people in the area. because then you always have a leg up. Same thing goes for number 6, accommodation. Hotels can get expensive really quick, especially during events and especially when you need more than one room. I've used Airbnb before with great success. There's some really cool places to stay on the cheap, especially in places like San Francisco where accommodation costs are insane. Airbnb pretty much lets you rent out someone's spare room. And it's cool because it's cheap, but I've also made a lot of great friends over the years staying with them with Airbnb. If you're super broke but you still want to make it to the event, I've got 2 options for you. First is couch surfing, which is essentially you're going to sleep on some stranger's couch. And the second is Indie Couch, which is pretty much the same thing, except it's other developers actually going to events or near events. I have a link to both of those sites in the description. I've used couch surfing before and it's actually pretty fun. All the people are great and I've never had a bad experience. Indie Couch I haven't used before, but it looks cool. So that's it for this video on Indie Game Marketing Events 101. There is so much more stuff to cover on events, but I wanted to keep this super simple. If you have any questions, you can tweet me at Tim Ruswick and I'd be happy to answer them.